Hello, everybody. We are very close to the ending today's session, so I hope, and I'll try the impossible. I'll try to give you a talk about legal issues and you still stay awakened. I don't know whether we should have emergency coffee at this stage, but still. So this is what I will try to talk about is pretty much, I mean, I'll give you the secrets out. I'll tell you that everything is fine. And we've done a lot of things in the last, I would say, 12 years since the previous directive about public sector information. I'll tell you the kinds of issues we have and why I think it's very feasible if we have a systematic, if we work systematically to overcome most of the issues and create a really good set of data sets and corpora so that we can then use them in different language resources, in different applications or in different infrastructures which actually use data. So I'll start with the state of the art, pretty much telling you about where we stand right now, both in legal terms and in terms of tools that we have developed. And I think we had a number of European projects that actually gave us some really, really good tools that we can reuse and advance. Then talk a bit about the rights structure, so to understand what is the structure of rights that we find on different types of content and data. A few pending issues. I tried to put them all in one slide. They're a bit more than that. And then a proposed roadmap. What could we do in order to really accelerate the process of actually resolving legal issues and letting you guys do the things you want to do. And finally, I have conclusions, but it's basically two small things, but quite important. So I'll start with the state of the art. I think it was a major, major step that we had the PSI 2013 directive, precisely because it shifted the focus from just reusing data to opening the data. And this may be a differentiation which is something you're familiar with, but from my experience, public sector bodies are not. When we talk about reusable data, it means that someone which is a reuser can obtain a license to reuse it, but not necessarily further disseminate them or not necessarily having everyone doing whatever they want with that without asking separate permissions. So if you have an open license, it's a piece of open data. If you have a license which you negotiate individually with a reuser, it's a reuse license. So what we are trying to do is to have as many data sets and as many bodies of text or different types of content under open licenses. And the reason why we want that is because it substantially, dramatically, I would say, reduces transaction costs. It's cheaper. So we have the directive, but the process of transposition of the directive has just begun. Greece has transposed the directive, if I'm not mistaken, I think Sweden as well. Spain has a draft law. It was approved on the 20th, I think yesterday or today. I'm not really sure. Romania is consulting on the transposition. The UK is also consulting on the transposition. Why I'm mentioning that? The way you actually transpose the directive has some minor details which make great difference. So for instance, in Greece, the transposition is such that it makes the public sector information open by default. You don't need a license, basically. In the UK, you have the open government license. And you have also different differentiation between Crown copyright material and other public sector material. I'm not sure how Spain and Romania does it. But since we are during the consultation phase, and since we are talking with about 30, we are planning to have 30 workshops, it's important to somehow try to push the transaction cost down in its implementation. So we should encourage our colleagues in the public sector bodies to opt for the easiest possible solution. So the transposition stage is something which could be a process beneficial for us, but also beneficial for the public sector bodies. The second thing is that we had a lot of projects the last 5 to 6 years. These are some of the projects I had the pleasure of taking part to. And these projects have produced some really useful stuff, but we need to advance those stuff. So the legal aspects of public sector information, we had 2 projects of that. The latest project has developed 2 guidelines, 2 sets of guidelines which are very useful. One is for public sector bodies as to how they release their information out using the Public Sector Information Directive. The second one is about license interoperability. Now, this is an issue which we're going to face during the project, and this is because we may have different administrations releasing data, but not necessarily under the same terms and conditions. We have done, during LAPSI 2, an analysis of how different open government licenses interoperate. It's interesting to see now through the data portal different types of licenses which are open but not necessarily of the same kind. All I want to say here is because we have a methodology as how you do that legally, and we can express some simple rules as to how you should license your data, and once you license, how you should combine different data sets. I think now we will have the opportunity to actually resolve a lot of these issues. However, my first suggestion would be to any public sector body is to keep it simple. So not to go for any fancy licenses, try not to create your own license, go for the simplest possible one. Qt Launchpad, Clarin, MetaShare, all these projects have developed different types of legal tools. They have developed different types of tags for tagging different types of licenses, as for you to know how you interoperate with these licenses or to know how they work. There's also a very interesting work we are doing right now, which is with the RDFization of licenses. I saw in the presentation talking also about ODRL and CCRL, which are 2 rights expression languages, quite useful. I have to say that we need to work a bit more on how we express the licenses using CCRL or ODRL because there are minute details there. Especially from one version of the license to the other. But since we have this experience, and that's what the slides is supposed to be saying, is we have tools, we have the experience, we have the people, it's very likely we're actually going to make it. The third thing of the state of the art is beyond the lights resources community and the language resources and language technologies communities. It has to do with different tools that have been developed in the context of other projects about rights clearance. Here, I would say that we have a number of projects which can calculate in abstract, which means without actual data. They can give you some guidelines as to whether the material you're releasing is in the public domain. Very broadly speaking, when we speak about rights, there are 3 things you should be aware of. One thing is to check whether this material is in copyright or in the public domain. Very important thing, because if it's in the public domain, you're pretty much saved. The second thing is who's the owner of the material. It's not straightforward. And the third thing is what's the license under which it is provided. These are 3 distinct issues. People tend to mix them up in one question, which is the rights field. This is not the only thing you're looking for. But we know how to separate these 3 issues, and we have decision trees. I'll show you an example as to how we make decisions as to, with regards to the questions, to these 3 separate sets of questions. So let's see very quickly the types of tools we have out there. We have the public domain Sherpa, which is mostly used for journals, but it gives you an idea of the licenses under which material is provided, as well as whether the material is in the public domain. The library, the Copyright Advisory Network has also a set of very interesting tools to answer whether the material is in the public domain or not. I like the Cornell public domain table because for lawyers it's like a cheat sheet. It gives you very quick and up-to-date information as to what is public domain in the United States. Not a very straightforward question. Of course, we have the open knowledge public domain calculators. Be careful, quite a few of these pages are not always up-to-date. So I think what our project is also supposed to do is to actually tell you this is a reliable resource, this needs a bit more up-to-date, and also notify the relevant communities. This is an interesting one for audiovisual material. I don't know how much of that we are going to use, but I think it's quite interesting because it gives you a framework about orphan works, or at least it tries as a project. That's a big story. That's the Orphan Works Registry maintained by the European Commission. And I think what we're going to be producing is going to be helpful for a number of projects. We had a discussion last night with some of you. I think this project is going to produce a lot of positive externalities for other projects, precisely because language resources touch upon many different issues. By figuring out what is in the public domain, who owns what, and what is licensed under what license, then we're going to be able to provide very useful legal information for many other projects. And I think the Orphan Works database needs to be, I think, totally improved as to which resources it uses to identify whether something is an orphan work or not. Of course, there are the European public domain calculators, and this is a project we are doing at UCL. It's not public as yet, but we're trying to semantically represent different types of information, legal information with regards to works, whether they are in the public domain or not. So this is pretty much what we have out there, lots of building blocks. Let's see a bit of the building blocks with regards to two areas of law which are interesting to us. These are not just the only two types of laws which are interesting for us. Personal data are also a major legal issue, but I don't have it on this slide. So if you see the slide, it has two parts. One is the horizontal reuse regimes. Down as a foundation, I have copyright and specific areas of copyright we always have to consider when we want to examine whether a resource is copyrighted or not, and then whether this resource is public sector information or not. And once we have that, what our experience has taught us in terms of how you try to resolve the issue of public sector information is that very frequently, depending on the type of ministry or public sector body you're dealing with, you have different sub-laws, you have different bylaws that actually regulate this particular set of information. There is a lot of fragmentation, but I think with the implementation of the new directive, the member states have a great opportunity to harmonize and systematize their access to information and reuse of public sector information laws. So I think it's a major opportunity. We should help the public sector bodies to understand that. Now, how do we actually assess the reusability of material? We have a whole range of steps, starting with whether it's public domain, orphan work, whether we have a special regime like public sector information, doing a fair dealing assessment, and finally a licensing assessment. For each one of them, we have already decision trees which we need to adapt depending on the types of data sets we're going to have. That's a similar schema. Again, having done quite a few projects in terms of public sector information, very frequently a public sector body comes when we try to clear a collection and tells me, I have this very difficult piece of text which is made by 20 authors. Some of them are not WIPO countries. It was built in over 30 years' time. It has data, audiovisual material. And I say, stop. That's probably the most difficult item you have in your collection. About 80% of your collection is not like that. Especially when we talk about public sector information, we can always, if we don't do the 80-20 rule, which is 80% of the collection requires 20% of the effort, and 20% of the collection, 80% of the effort, is 60-40. Let's say it's not 80-20. But we need to encourage the people we're working with, and that's why the anchor points are crucial, to identify types of collection which are in the 80%, not the 20%, if we want to have any chance. Another question very frequently asked is, what is the jurisdiction which is relevant? The jurisdiction is still a relevant question, but it's also very crucial to be pragmatic about it. It is more crucial to ask, for instance, what is the jurisdiction you're interested in because you are likely to get an infringement lawsuit, rather trying to resolve private international law questions. Again, we will start with simple questions and try to leave the most difficult questions for the end. Pending issues. We have the copyright harmonization issues. That's a major part of the digital agenda anyhow. Limitations and exceptions are not harmonized. Public domain rules are not harmonized. And the orphan work rules, they have to be practical. But these are not unsurmountable issues. These are within the roadmap. and I think what we're doing is going to contribute to the resolution of such issues. The PSI transposition, I mentioned that before. I think we could contribute to member states, and we could learn from the transposition stage. It's really important to identify the stakeholders and the people that actually are involved in the transposition process in the member states. Vertical legal regimes harmonization. What I mean here is that if you see how, let's say, the UK manages statistical data and how Greece manages statistical data, they are both PSI, they are both under the directive, they have very different approaches. So we need to understand the special regimes we are dealing with. Health, PSI, cultural PSI is also very weird. So we need to understand these special regimes and try to actually provide very specific guidelines. But we have good practices. People hack the system the whole time. So if they do it in one member state, it is very likely that the idea they had is going to be applicable somewhere else. And of course, all this means to build administrative capacity. I think that's the biggest positive externality out of these projects. The public sector bodies are going to start thinking a bit more towards customer service, supporting the digital single market, not just their national markets or national legal systems. And another thing which I think is very useful is how we can use different crowdsourcing models in order to improve the quality of our legal documentation. Sorry, final proposed roadmap. So a few ideas about how we could do that. The first thing is to identify even a broad range of corpora. So what are we going to deal with after all? I think this is really crucial because this is going to define the set of legal issues and the range of reusable tools from other projects. I don't think it's something which is going to take ages, but we need to reach a decision quite soon. The second thing is to take these tools and on the basis of this corpora to create, to understand the legal framework which is relevant to us, and try to also use collaborative tools. My suggestion has been also in other projects to, once we have our reports at a reasonable stage or our tools at a reasonable stage, to use wikibooks in order to constantly update them. We've done that in some projects like LabC or Qt Launchpads. I think it's a decent idea. We still have to think about how we make it more user-friendly, but it's something which allows collaborative working and, of course, complete the training material. During stage C, you actually use these things with the groups you are working with, and you create more decision trees and tools. It's really crucial at this stage to be able to establish communities of interest and communities of practice. This is also something that the Commission favors, I hope. And stage D is how to ensure the interoperability, which means make this community to keep reproducing such material. I'll finish here with two very simple conclusions. What we're trying to do here is to actually let the content flow. And if you think about how copyright law should be working, is like a water mill. So if you think of the content or the data as the water, and if you think of the copyright system and the licenses as the mill, the energy that is produced is the value. So what we need to do is to allow the flow of content, but using copyright tools so that we actually can produce some kind of value. And I think we can do that with quite a few of the licensing tools we have. But when the license don't work or fair use doesn't work, the flow stops, and that's not a very pleasant thing to see. So since we have the tools at all levels, legal framework, licenses, training material and expertise, and technical tools, and just to give you a couple of snapshots, we have decision trees, we have handbooks, we have standard licenses, we have laundry tags, we have even wizards and automated decision-making trees. We only need to use them. Thanks very much.